All right, we are back on the podcast where we are training men in spiritual fitness. I am Evan McGinty here with two of my very good friends. We've got Andy Murray. Andy, how you doing today?
Doing well, Evan. Very cold Scotland at the moment. We're longing for spring to come.
Oh, soon enough, my friend, soon enough. Or just come down to South Louisiana with me. It's always warm here. All right, always warm. We also got Joe
And
Bernard with us. Joe, how are you today?
Good. I've actually got a question for Andy. I think I learned a new Scottish word yesterday. Um, Actually for cold. Snell. Is that a word?
No, Joe's just making it up.
I think you're just making it up.
Okay. I'm going back to my source. I was taught this word yesterday, but Andy is the most Scottish person I know. So if you
If Andy
if you
doesn't know it, then it's not real. That's what I say. I don't know.
It could be
okay,
a dialect I'm
trying.
not aware of, but yeah, Chile I think would be.
Yeah. Well.
Dreich pretty good at the moment.
Okay.
Well, we about last week we started helping guys by introducing them to another Puritan. We love the Puritans, so we got Thomas Brooks and his book "Precious Remedies Against Satan's Devices." I don't think I'm gonna be able to remember the name of that book, no matter how many episodes we do on this. It's a weird title. I get it. If you think it's weird, guys, don't worry, stick with me because I'm with you. I also think it's a strange title. But big picture, what it's trying to do and what we want to do is we want to help you find the right tools to fight against sin and temptation. And that's what Thomas Brooks is trying to do here. He's saying, okay, Satan is real and he's got a strategy for trying to woo you in to sin. And are you, men, thinking about the fact that are you naive to that? First of all, are you naive to the fact that there is Satan and sin and temptation and all of these things? Or are you facing things with a strategy yourself? Do you have a strategy for fighting against sin? Are you using the tools that are at your disposal by the power of the Holy Spirit? So that's what we want to do is introduce guys to maybe some of the tactics that Satan may be using against you right now, and then introduce you through Thomas Brooks to some remedies, some tools and some strategies for fighting against sin and temptation. So we're going to just kind of pick up where we left off last week and start about talking about one of the tactics that Satan uses against guys. And Andy, I want to toss this one to you. He says that Satan will often try to tempt guys by saying, "Look, it's just sin is just little, or this is just a little sin, a small sin. You don't have to worry about it. It's just a small sin." So expand that thought and what was Brooks trying to say there?
Yeah, as you say, Brooks talks about this device as minimizing and lessening sin, and particularly the consequences of sin. So I think we live in a an atomized society, don't we? So we're often tempted when we're on our own. Perhaps we're tempted to look at things on the internet, TV, on our phones, and it feels very private, doesn't it? And
Mhm.
I think what Satan is trying to tempt us to do is to say, nobody knows about it. It's a small thing. You can manage it. And as we saw last week, um, Satan gives us the bait, but he hides the hook, and we don't see the full consequences of our sin until later. And we can think of biblical examples of that. We can think of David and his adultery with Bathsheba, um, a glance, a lustful glance. We think of the consequences of, in terms of marriage, in terms of murder, in terms of deceit. Um, and we see how that plays out in the Bible. We see that exchange between David and Nathan when Nathan eventually challenges David, and he says in 2 Samuel 12 what David had been given, and he says, "And I gave you your master's house and your master's wives into your arms, and gave you the house of Israel and of Judah. And if this were too little, I would add to you as much more. Why have you despised the word of the Lord to do what is evil in his sight?" Um, and the full consequences of what David had done were brought before him. We can think of Samson, again, given so much opportunity, and was tempted and fell into sin. We can think of Judas, for 30 pieces of silver, he betrayed the Lord, and how he regretted it so quickly.
Mhm.
But I think what Satan does is, in terms of this device, is he says it's just a little thing. It's just a wee sin. It's a private thing. Nobody will know about it, and um, there'll be there'll be very few consequences, if any. And Brooks is um, emphasizing just the danger of that. Um, I've got this quote from our brother Joe in his book The Way Forward, which I think just sums it all up in terms of David. What David lost sight of while lured by lust was the reality that the fullness of joy was not in the arms of a woman, but at God's right hand. God could have and would have provided David with far more joy and better joy than any guilt-infused affair could supply. Yet sadly, the sun was eclipsed by a candle, and David chose a one-night stand over abiding communion with God. And I think that sums it up well.
Yeah.
Can,
So
can can I
the
jump in real
yeah,
quick?
yeah, go ahead.
Just a couple of things that I thought about with that. One is doom scrolling. It just seems small. I'm just filling in some time. But when you keep doing that for long enough, you stumble upon stuff. And it is just this sort of wedge that gets drived in and then, it just sort of gets bigger over time. Or like here you have like work night outs. I'm sure in States too, but just I'm just gonna go out one night with these friends. Just one night. It's New Year's Eve or it's whatever else. But all of these things where it's just isolated. I can contain it to this little area. Um, and that's just the problem. You strike up the friendship you really enjoy. You had a great time. It was so much fun last time. I'll just do it one more time, and it just sort of snowballs. But yeah, that idea that the little things, really, that idea of a slippery slope. There are slippery slopes, and we have to be aware of them.
Yeah, I think part of the issue I had with this section here is I think Thomas Brooks gives Satan a little too much credit here, or maybe I don't give Satan enough credit. I don't know. But I just feel like my own personal strategy for fighting sin is to prioritize sin and to see some sins as smaller than others. And like you say, like, oh, just doom scrolling, it's no big deal. The things I need to focus on are the big public things. I'm not going to have these big public sins, but the small private ones or these little bitty things that I think that's me. That's my device. Like, and I feel like that's where I need help. Is I even in my own approach and view of sin see things as there's just some sins that are so small and insignificant that it's not worth the battle or the fight. I need to focus all my energy on the bigger things. So Joe, help us out here. He does give us some remedies. I think he gives like 7 of them, but you don't have to do all those. But what would you say to the guy who is doom scrolling, to the guy who is doing a work night out or whatever, sees maybe some small, what he would say is a small sin in his life and is overlooking it and saying that's not that big of a deal?
Yeah, I mean, I think about little. Um, Little does not mean less dangerous.
Yeah.
I don't like a virus. I've never seen one. I've been really, really ill because of contracting viruses,
Yeah.
but they slip in and they're so tiny you can't even, you can't see them. You don't even know that you caught one. And we often don't know what we're inhaling, what we're touching when we're involved in these kinds of sin. Um, but I think, in the Sermon on the Mount, it's not just that Jesus is saying that to look lustfully um, is just as big of a rule to transgress as to commit adultery. I mean, he's also saying lust is the seed of adultery.
Yeah.
If a little, I remember Louisiana, you're always cleaning up your, as we say, your backyard. And there's always stuff growing. This little like acorns fall into the ground all over the place, and you've got these little shoots. And if you leave a part of your garden or your yard unkempt for a while, they get really hard to pull out. Eventually you can't just use both your hands, and it just kind of happens slowly and mysteriously. So that, in the same way Jesus says that the mustard seed, grows into this big plant, the kingdom of God grows like that. Well, the kingdom of Satan actually grows kind of like that as well. And so I think, to have an appropriate sense of the danger, to where you've got your filter up, and and I think he's got lots of interesting kind of not mental games, but ways to kind of reconfigure your thought pattern.
Mhm.
And so Brooks, he says things like, in a certain sense, your small sins are the worst sins. Um, if you look at the devastation, for example, of like last week, I think I mentioned World War One. Like it was all fought over nothing in one sense. It wasn't World War Two. Like it's kind of why did all these men die? Why waste blood on these issues? And in one sense, it's a sad thought that we would happily have Christ's blood shed over what we view as small things. He had to die for those sins. They're not small. And so I think just it's not that we want to sin big, but just to see that there's really no such thing as small sin. And the more foolish, the more irrational, the more just lawless our behavior is,
Mhm.
the more careless we are with the blood of Christ. And it's just trivializing something that we should take so seriously, the problem of sin. So I would just encourage guys, think through them. Find the one that really touches your heart in a special way, but it'll certainly help you reconfigure your thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you're right. I would tell guys like the thing you think is small, the sin you think is small, it is like a mustard seed or what. It will grow over time if you will track it. Like if you're the kind of guy who has a prayer journal or anything like that, who confesses sin regularly, if you will track a small, what you would say is a small sin in that journal, and if you just let it fester, never actually repented, but just let it go over time, track that sin and watch it become something big in your life. I've watched for myself how I held on to a little bit of bitterness, just a little bit of bitterness, and it wasn't that big a deal, right? But it grew into something huge, and I could track it. I can look back through my prayer journal and track it. I saw it was there. I knew it was there. I even confessed, but I never really repented of it, never really turned from it, never gave it the weight it deserved. Like, wait, this can infect all of my relationships. Wait, this can infect my relationship with God and everything else. So it's those small sins actually grow to become the big sins, as you're saying. And so
Well,
if you don't kill them when they're small, yeah.
I would say, what's interesting, his thought is primarily, rightly so, between the soul and God.
Yeah.
But we've also got the whole kind of horizontal thing, and just to sort of keep on the same thread, that little small virus that you happily inhale, well, guess what? You exhale it.
Yeah.
And how many of our little sins do we just transmit, and they become our kids' sins, or they become something that we spread to our friends. And so the most important thing is being holy before God, but equally we want to be passing horizontally righteousness, not unrighteousness, to those that we love.
Yeah, that's good. That kind of leads into the next device that Satan uses, and that's that he kind of blinds us to the fallout of sin. So he shows us the pleasure of sin, kind of the shows us the before, but never shows us the after, the fallout and the downward spiral that can happen because of sin. So you think about a man who's struggling with greed. It's just a little bit of hoarding or greediness in your life. What he's not showing you is 20 years down the line how lonely you're going to be and how a life of greed and selfishness turns you into a man who has no relationships because you hoarded everything to yourself. So, what are some of Andy, I'll throw this to you. What are some of the remedies to this device of Satan of maybe showing us the pleasure of the sin, but not showing us the fallout from that sin?
Well, I think being men of the word, where we have plenty of examples of the fallout from sin, is the first step. Brooks quotes this Jewish proverb, which I think is really good on page 34. There is no punishment comes upon Israel in which there is not 1 ounce of the golden calf. When you think of the consequences of the golden calf on generations of Israelites, and we all know examples of men whose fall has had an intergenerational impact, and the consequences have been felt by family members down through the generations. And again, just a warning for um, how carefully we need to guard our hearts and see the seriousness of sin. Brooks also says that in terms of how God records the saints that fall in the Bible. There's two reasons for that. Um, One is to keep those from fainting, sinking in despair under the burden of their sins who fall through weakness and infirmity. And the other is that their falls may be as landmarks to warn others that stand to take heed lest they fall. So two sides of the same coin. They're there to warn us, but they're also there when we do fall for us to have hope that there is a way back.
Mm.
That God is very gracious, that God does raise us up, but we always feel the mark of that fall and the devastating consequences of it. So there are many biblical examples of men that have fallen. You think of Noah, he just comes out of the ark, full of the promises of God, full of a new start, and then he gets drunk and shames himself. And these are given to us as examples that, take heed, he who stands, lest you fall. And
Mm.
I think it's just a good lesson for all of us to remember.
Yeah. So for that guy who is maybe thinking, well, this is a small sin, and what really will there be any effect? The guy that's highlighting the pleasure of that sin, but overlooking or not aware of the fallout. Part of what I'm hearing you say, Andy, is and go read your Bible. Like what you're going to see is a track record of what happens, the fallout of sin and disobedience and rebellion. This is not pretty. It's there's broken relationships, like horizontal and vertical, and so yeah, we need to recognize that there is an immediate fallout that happens from.
And I also just think, having a band of brothers around you. I was walking with a young guy very recently chatting about marriage, and he's in the first stages of marriage. Things are tough with young kids, and I was just saying, you've just got to hang in there. When there are days when you feel like walking away, you've got to think 10, 20 years down the line, and the effect of that on your children, on your wife, on yourself. Tough times will come, but you've got to stick in there, and you've got to stick with it.
Mm-hmm. It's good. Let's maybe jump into one more of these devices that Satan uses, just to kind of help guys out. This is one that the language of a Puritan doesn't make sense to me, so I'm going to throw it to Joe and let him translate it. But he's trying to highlight the mercy of God, I think. But let me read what he says is the device. He says to present the soul as one made up of all mercy. So explain that to me, Joe, and help me understand why guys may fall into that today.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, this is an important one. I mean, what it really means is present God to the soul as one made up of all mercy. Um, and so, I mean, we've kind of been through, I think we're maybe coming out of it, but there's a wonderful recovery of grace in the last, 25, 30 years. But sometimes a cheap grace, sometimes a misconception of God whereby all you ever hear is that he's merciful and loving and relentless in his love. And that's subject to abuse. And Brooks wants us to have an accurate perspective of who God is. And so, he gives us some various ways to recover a more complete understanding of God. And he says some things I think that might scare guys, but they should scare guys. One is the scary possibility of being left in your sin. Got Romans 1 opened up, and one of the really scary things about Romans 1 is the way, sin starts with us, but as we give ourselves to sin, three times Paul mentions God then giving people up
Mm.
in the same way that he gave over the children of Israel to their enemies at various points. That if we arrogantly begin to pursue our sin, there's a way in which God allows us to then experience the reality of this. And that's a scary thought. In the same way you wouldn't want to be held captive by the Assyrians, you don't really want to be held captive by lust. It's
Mm.
fun to dabble in, but the thought of just being handed over to it, you can look around and you can find those people, and it's an ugly thing to see. He reminds us that God is just as he is merciful. So he is merciful. He's infinite in his mercy. He's also infinite in his justice. And even if it's just the discipline that God will bring Um, and that he will grow us up. He loves us enough. I read an article today on the BBC about a new style of parenting where you never say no to your child at all. It's called gentle parenting. That's not God's method. You know, God will tell us no, and there are providential situations that are really hard that we have to then go through. And, Andy was talking about David earlier. His life gets much more difficult on the other side of Bathsheba. And he grew up under that, but it's not something that you'd want to choose to step into. Um, and then he also, and this is something to think about, sins against mercy are, in one sense, worse than sins. I didn't finish that quote, but that idea when we're taking advantage of mercy. So we go into it saying, hey, on the other side, I'm just going to ask forgiveness. That's such an ugly attitude.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just to presume upon grace. I mean, I would hope, I mean, just think of marriage. If you thought, okay, my wife will forgive me, so I'm going to go do what I want, and I'll just come home and then just expect forgiveness. I mean, you're just trampling on love. The very thing that should inspire love in return, you're abusing. And so to abuse grace is just such an attitude of ingratitude and just ill will. So I think those are really powerful lines of thought that really do kind of change. If you're prone to just blanking the justice of God, only thinking about forgiveness and grace, these are things that can help us see the danger and the risk of sin.
That's good. That's good. Yeah. If you're one of those guys that's struggling with, abusing the mercy and the grace of God. Yeah. I think part of the advice here that I'm hearing is what you really need to do is just double down on mercy. I would give the guy that's struggling with this, like the advice of go meditate on mercy. What do you really believe that mercy means? What do you really believe that means? And what do you think is actually the proper response to God's mercy, to the gift of mercy? What is the proper response? Is the proper response to then go and abuse it or presume upon the grace that no, that surely can't be the proper response. So I think part of the problem is that guys haven't thought enough about mercy. They haven't thought enough really about what it is and how to respond to it. So I would just encourage you guys to take some time to meditate on that. But we'll wrap it up there and continue on maybe one more week and talking about some of these devices and remedies. I'll wrap up by just saying I give guys a lot of book recommendations, or hand out a lot of books. I love this book by Thomas Brooks so far. It's good. I probably won't hand it out to guys though. I'll be honest. If I am going to give guys a book on sin and the Satan and fighting sin, this is the one, man. It's Surviving the Trenches by Joe Bernard. So if you're looking, guys, for a book that you'll actually read, look at the difference in the thickness of these books if you're watching on YouTube. All right. One that you'll actually read with some modern day examples, modern day translation of how to fight sin. We have that resource. You can find it on our website, or you can just Google Surviving the Trenches by Joe Bernard. Some great examples of what it looks like for ordinary Christian men to develop a strategy for fighting against sin. So go find that and then join us next week. We're going to talk about this some more.